Welcome to The Explainer, where we break down the big ideas shaping our world. Today, we're diving into a quiet revolution that's happening in factories everywhere, and it's all being driven by a huge wave of new global policies.
It's a great question, right? They seem totally disconnected. But the answer is actually pretty simple. They all fundamentally change how things get made. These massive global forces all meet right on the factory floor, and they affect the cost, the quality, and sometimes even the very existence of the products we use every single day.
Exactly. So today, we're going to trace the journey of just one simple metal part to really understand how this incredibly complex web of new rules is transforming manufacturing from the person on the shop floor all the way to the ship in the port.
Okay, let's jump right in. Our journey starts right inside the factory. See, before a part can even think about leaving the building, it has to meet a whole set of rules that are all about safety and precision.
So, take Europe, for example. If you're making, say, a steel beam for a new building, it's not enough for it to just look strong. A standard like EN 1090 makes it a legal requirement to follow some incredibly strict processes. We're talking about tracking exactly where the raw steel came from, proving the welder is certified for that specific job, and documenting every single step. It's basically a complete paper trail that guarantees safety.
And here's the crucial takeaway. Quality benchmarks, like the famous ISO 9001, are no longer a nice-to-have. They're the price of entry into the global market. If you want to sell parts to a car company or an airline, you have to prove you meet these standards. It is absolutely not optional anymore. And what that does is it forces the entire supply chain, all around the world, to a higher level, making things safer and more reliable for all of us. Okay, so the factory is making a safe, high-quality part. That's great. But now, let's head over to the business office, because following all these rules, as important as they are, comes with a very, very real price tag. One of the most direct hits to the wallet comes from trade policy. I mean, when the US put a 25% tariff on most imported steel, it immediately jacked up the price of raw materials for countless manufacturers, literally overnight. Suddenly, the most basic ingredient for their products got a whole lot more expensive. And you can see that ripple effect almost instantly. Your average car has about half a ton of steel in it. Well, analysts figured that this one single policy added roughly $1,000 to the material cost of making that vehicle. And, that cost has to go somewhere. Either it shrinks the carmaker's profit or it gets passed on to you.
Now this is really interesting. It's the hidden burden of just keeping up with all the rules, the cost of compliance, safety programs, permits, paperwork. It averages over $29,000 per employee. But look at the difference for small manufacturers. They get hit with a staggering cost of over $50,000 per employee. Why? Because they just don't have the scale to spread out all those administrative costs.
So you've got costs going up from tariffs and compliance. That pressure forces companies to look for savings anywhere they can. And a huge area of focus? The power grid. Turns out, new regulations aren't just about what you make, but also about the very energy that runs the machines you make it with. Policy has a direct and pretty dramatic impact on energy costs. Thanks to a mix of things like taxes and carbon pricing, manufacturers in Europe were paying roughly 2.5 times more for their electricity than their competitors over in the US or China. And when your power bill is that high, you have absolutely no choice but to find every single way to be more energy efficient. And this isn't just about price. Governments are setting some really strict targets. The EU has legally binding goals for energy reduction. Japan requires factories to get about 1% more efficient every single year. And in a really wild example, China's dual control policy, which limits energy use, actually led to provinces forcing factories to shut down completely just so they can meet their national energy goals. Now, this whole drive for efficiency connects perfectly to our next stop, the planet. Because environmental rules are getting tougher and tougher, and they're forcing some fundamental changes in the materials and processes that companies use. Some of these policies create hard deadlines that you just can't ignore. For decades, this stuff called hexavalent chromium was the go-to chemical for stopping rust, but it's also a known carcinogen, so the EU has been phasing it out, with a final ban for most uses kicking in this September. This one rule forced an entire industry to re-engineer everything and find safer alternatives. But there's an even bigger environmental policy shift on the horizon. And it's called the EU's Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, or CBAM for short. So what is it? Well, to put it simply, it's a tariff on pollution. If you want to import steel into the European Union, you're now going to have to account for the carbon emissions that were created when that steel was made. If it was produced using a dirty, high-emission process, you're going to have to pay a tax at the border. So the obvious next question is, what does this actually mean for the price of things? How much is this new pollution tariff going to add to the bottom line?
Well, analysts are estimating it could increase the cost of imported steel by around 16% once it's fully up and running. That creates a massive financial incentive for manufacturers everywhere, not just in Europe, to adopt cleaner production methods if they want to sell into one of the biggest markets on the planet.
Okay, for our last stop, let's zoom all the way out to the world stage. Because while policies like CBAM are creating new kinds of barriers, this is constant tug of war going on between two competing trade philosophies, and it's creating both obstacles and opportunities. You really have two big forces pulling in opposite directions. On one side, you've got protectionism, policies like those U.S. steel tariffs, which are designed to protect local industries by making foreign goods more expensive. And on the other side, you've got these huge free trade agreements, like the RCEP deal in Asia. That does the exact opposite. It's designed to make it cheaper and easier to trade between all the member countries. And the impact of these deals can be massive. For companies that are inside a trade bloc like RCEP, if they navigate the rules the right way, they could cut their cost of materials like steel by up to 25%. That gives them a huge cost advantage over any competitors who are outside that club and still have to pay all the regular tariffs. So when you put this all together, what's the big takeaway? We're seeing this whole new policy tax getting built into everything that's made. It's a brand new industrial landscape where high quality is just the starting point, production has to be cleaner, costs are way more complex, and a company's ability to adapt quickly is pretty much the key to survival. Which leaves us with a really big question. For the manufacturers trying to navigate this maze of rules, and for all of us as consumers who rely on what they make, is all this complexity just a burden that's slowing things down? Or is it actually the blueprint for a smarter, cleaner, and ultimately safer industrial world? Something to think about.